Animator was directed with good cheer and a minimum of gross-out scenes by Stuart Gordon, and credit Jeffrey Combs for being able to work convincingly with portions of his co-stars. A really entertaining picture, and I said that because I've been accused of having a short fuse on bloodlettings and all this, and I thought, no, they pulled it off. There was somehow some kind of good spirit to it.
I liked it very much. I saw it at its world premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, where it was playing in the marketplace, you know, back in the little theaters where they're selling movies. And after a week of serious films, uplifting films, films that had a message, films with a humanistic philosophy behind them, it was really refreshing to come in and see this film, which was essentially just a Stuart Gordon, sledgehammer, special effects, lots of blood, lots of severed heads, lots of violence kind of movie with style that got you out of the gore.
Yeah, when you say lots of blood, I think people will turn off from it.
But
not as much
blood with style, blood with I think a satiric and a comic purpose.
Yeah, deadpan and funny.
You got just a glimpse there of the terrifying nature of the zombies because, frankly, on television, we can't show you how really violent and really bloody this film is. So I'm going to combine a recommendation with a warning. The recommendation is that Dawn of the Dead is one of the best and most original horror films I've ever seen. And the warning is, this is really extreme in its violence. It goes beyond what you may have seen before. It's for adults only. Proceed with caution.
I like the picture too, but I really don't think it's very terrifying. I think the zombies are a little more comical than anything else. There's a guy gets his head lopped off by a helicopter blade. I normally would shrink at something like that. In this film, it's done so broadly that I found it humorous.
How'd you like the intestines when they were disemboweled?
Roger, I looked. Normally I would look away. I think the guy somehow does it in a comic way that makes you at least watch it.
I agree, too. The movie is some kind of a horror masterpiece. I just think there are some people who ought to be warned. It's violent. Might want to take along an air sickness bag.
I think what I enjoyed more than any of this that we've talked about, the violence, is the statement about shopping centers. I think they've sucked the life out of these places. They're enclosed malls. They're lifeless. Obviously, we got zombies walking around them. That's what George Romero has to say about American shopping malls.
Okay.
Okay, that's Halloween, a horror movie we both think is pretty good.
Very good.
One of the things a short scene can't show you is that Halloween is directed and acted with a great deal more artistry and craftsmanship than the sleaze bucket movies we've been talking about. But there's another much more important difference. As you watch Halloween, your basic sympathies are always enlisted on the side of the woman, not with the killer. The movie develops its women characters as independent, intelligent, spunky, and interesting people. Halloween does not hate women.
Yeah, you know, when I saw that scene, I must admit I wasn't really worrying about the woman as much as I was placing myself in that closet and thinking about that killer, how I would handle it. And I was also appreciating the fact that I think Halloween not only doesn't hate women, but it loves film and filmmaking. That music is just fabulous. The way he starts one theme, then lays another thing on top of it, keeping the other theme. Really good. Also, the light coming through the slats in that closet. This is a film that's sort of up. That scene is up and you're jumpy rather than getting depressed and feeling sorry and feeling sorry that you're even watching it. An upbeat thing.
You know, I think what you're touching on here is that artistry can redeem any subject matter.
Sure.
That's why I've always been opposed to censorship. I don't believe any subject matter should be off base.
Right.
The question is, what does the artist do with it? How does he look at it? How does he put it through his art in order to make a statement about it, in order to make it into either a commercial film or a serious film? I believe that in the case of a movie like Halloween, we can engage in that joy of filmmaking that you talk about. That's not the case with the other films that really address themselves to the lowest possible common denominator.
So we're not knocking scary pictures, per se, just a certain kind.
It's an irony that mad slasher movies like the Friday the 13th series routinely get an R rating from the MPAA and play to millions of teenagers, anyone who can find that legendary 18-year-old adult guardian to go in with them. But let an artistic film come along that really sincerely considers the subject, and it's banished by the MPAA to that ghetto between the R and the X, so that most theater chains are afraid or legally prevented from booking it. This film deserves to be seen. And you know, this must be the only civilized country on earth that doesn't believe there's such a thing as an adults-only movie, a movie that is unsuitable for people under 17. We have the R, which is a joke, very loosely enforced, and then everything else is allegedly hardcore pornography. There's nothing in between. And do you know why they won't pass an A rating? I'll tell you why. It's because the A rating would have to be enforced, and they would have to look at somebody holding money at the ticket counter and say, no, we won't take your money. And the MPAA and the theater owners are too gutless to do that, and so what we have are pictures like this being punished as a result.
Well, I think you're right to include the theater owners because they're the ones that would have to do the enforcing. They don't want to get near it. Also, the media, newspapers and radio stations and television stations have policies that they won't play or advertise X-rated films. So it's really the whole network here.
Or
It's
even
not just
unrated films. You take a paper like the Los Angeles Times, one of the great papers in our country. Its own critics have said that a movie like Henry and a movie like The Cook, The Thief, and so forth are great films, but will they allow them to be advertised if they were rated X? No.
There's a sequence when Otis kicks in a television set. And when I saw him kicking in and destroying the television set, I realized that, at least my opinion was, that the director was showing that is the way they have just finished destroying somebody in a car, a couple of women in a car, I think, and they kick in the television set with the same reaction. These people, therefore, view women, people, as inanimate objects, as stuff that, if you don't like it, you kick it in. That's the mental breakdown that has occurred in these heads. And so, by using movie imagery, the film deals with tough material. Listen, I didn't like looking at some of the murders there.
No.
I wouldn't have made the film that way, but I appreciate that. I think somebody's trying to do something serious rather than totally joyride exploitation.
It's an unforgettable portrait of a sociopath.
If you think this film is coming out in favor of incest, well, I don't know, maybe it is, but much more important, I think that filmmaker Schrader is saying that incestuous feelings are present in the human animal. And this film, like so many of Schrader's movies, walk us through a lot of sexual taboos. Cat People also walks us through such emotionally loaded ideas as fear of loss of virginity, fear of turning into a sexual animal, of letting loose your darkest emotional desires. It's a film that is very challenging for a horror film, a film that proves, I think, that you don't have to be sleazy to be thrilling. I rank some of the scenes in this movie, in fact, with the work of the grand master of suspense and horror, Alfred Hitchcock, and I guess that's about as high a compliment as you can pay to any horror film.
I also admire this film very much. One of the things I liked about it was the way that Schrader fairly fearlessly integrated myth and magic with everyday details of the guy cleaning out the cages at the zoo and so forth.
He handles both worlds.
And didn't apologize for the fact that he is saying there is a world of magic that exists co-equal with the real everyday world that the rest of us inhabit.
I think that's a very good point, and it is challenging. You know, people criticize films like this because they're raunchy or something like that. It would be much easier to posit a very innocent, happy world like Neil Simon does, a very safe little world. I think it's exciting. I think it makes the film more real when it gets fantastic.
I would like to make another point, too, and that's about Nastasia Kinski, and this starts with a little story. Last Saturday night, I was down in the basement of a house of a friend of mine. He's a film buff, and he gathered a group of friends, and we watched 4.5 hours of movie trailers from the early 50s. 4.5 hours of all of these terrible movies, and during that entire time, only one person really jumped out of the screen and became alive, and it was Marilyn Monroe. I think Nastasia Kinski has the same thing Marilyn Monroe had, whatever that is. There was something magic about her. I've seen her in 3 films now. I think she stands aside from all the other young actresses, and I hope I'm not going out on a limb, but I think she's remarkable.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, she is compelling. As soon as the camera comes on her in this movie, you're watching. Unpredictable, a strange look, an androgynous look, perhaps. I think that she is a perfect casting here, both her and Malcolm McDowell. I think it's an absolutely terrific film.
Okay, so a real good endorsement for Cat People.
There's a good deal of violence in Scream 2. It's bloodier than the original film, but the screenplay by Kevin Williamson is just as clever at devising dialogue that plays against it. This is not only a horror movie that knows it's a horror movie, but it's a sequel that contains a discussion of sequels. Is this as good as the original? Well, not quite, but it's close enough. I'm giving it thumbs up.
I'm giving it thumbs up, too, and I liked it more than the original picture. Maybe the challenge of coming up to a sequel to that one is daunting, and this film pulls it off. I just thought that the writing was smarter, and the number of characters that are being juggled in this screenplay. I mean, normally you have, you know, a row of ducks that get knocked off in these pictures, and here I got to know some of the ducks.
You know, Kevin Williamson's screenplay does have a lot of really neat lines in it. For example, at one point, the Courtney Cox character is accused of posing nude on the internet. In her defense, that was my head. It was Jennifer Aniston's body. That's a funny line.
Better than Minute Lice, Roger. I like that one.
You get a wonderful sense there of something that might have been waiting there a long time for somebody to find it. Anyway, they go on board that mysterious ship, and they wind up bringing back an extremely unwelcome guest on board their own ship. An alien creature that's the movie's most original invention. Now, I don't want to give away too much. I'm not giving away too much when I say it's kind of a cross between a squid and a spider and the Thing. And it's not real great to look at because its body is covered with extraterrestrial intestines. And the humans battle for survival. The alien oozes around the ship like a mucous membrane from outer space, and
The movie is one of the scariest old-fashioned space operas I can remember.
Well, it did scare me too. I looked away and I was yelling with like a few other people, it's going to hit them on the floor, it's going to come from the ceiling.
It's in the next row, it's behind me in the theater. Right.
But I want to say that, you know, strip away all the beautiful scenery and the evocative weirdness of the picture. What we really have here is basically the haunted house film, only instead of a wild creature running around in a haunted house, we got a wild creature running around in a spaceship. And so this is not the greatest science fiction film ever made, even though it seems to be doing very well across the country.
Well, I think the combination of horror and science fiction is a very appealing one right now, very commercial. There is one moment, though, when the film does transcend just that horror, haunted spaceship sort of thing, and that's in this scene we just saw. As it goes on a little bit further, they enter that spaceship, they go inside, they find the alien pilot all desiccated from his voyage that might have taken place millions of years ago, and then they go into that big enormous cavern down below and what they find there and so forth. Gives you a real sense, I mean, from the point of view of art direction and everything else, that this could have been an alien ship. It's not just another TV or movie creation.
Yeah, one consumer point. A lot of young people are probably going to want to see this picture. They love horror films. This one's pretty bloody. It is pretty violent, and I think a lot of people, adults and kids, are going to be turned off and maybe frightened too much by it. So for young kids, certainly, this is not a picture to go see.
It's R-rated.
Yeah, for a reason.
Yeah, there's a reason for it.
And when you know that about him, then you can tell that Spielberg obviously enjoys manipulating his audience. I like the idea of him sitting back there waiting for that moment, guiding and directing the audience. And it's true, when you are in a Spielberg film, there is a sense that someone else is in control of your mind and your eyes. He is not just content to throw random pictures at us. He wants to run us and run us ragged, and we certainly experience that in Jaws, the film that made him a star director.
There's no doubt in my mind that Steven Spielberg makes just about the best pictures of anybody for seeing with an audience. I remember seeing Jaws in 1975 with about 1,200 people in Chicago. The audience would levitate simultaneously, 1,200 people, and then they would come down laughing with relief in a way because there was fear in the reason that they were scared and so forth. This is interesting, the way that he does what Hitchcock used to say that he liked to do, play the audience like a piano.
And I'll tell you another thing that he's doing. You're right about Suburbia. You have it in Duel, and you also certainly have it in Jaws with this exclusive little island. Here's Roy Scheider away from the big city cop, and now he's on the island, and these incredible things happen. And I think what Spielberg also knows, because he grew up in Suburbia, is that he imagines he's the filmmaker now for the shopping center theater. Think about it. You have all these suburban people. It's not downtown with the people dressing up going to movies anymore. It's all these people driving into the parking lot, going to the suburban theater. They're boring. They're all dressed with the same little emblems on their clothes. They go in, and wow, they see people just like them, and then boom, something exciting happens. You got all these people hoping that something will happen to them that's exciting in their suburbs, and he delivers it.
Her matter-of-fact tone is really very good there, and that little cross that's around her neck all the time takes on an ironic, threatening quality. Director Rob Reiner does a very good job of mixing horror and humor here. His shooting style is crisp and clean. We remember the detail of individual shots, a bobby pin on the floor, an empty telephone, a smudge on a piece of typing paper. Barry Sonnenfeld, who also photographed the beautiful Miller's Crossing, he did the fine camera work here too. And Kathy Bates is equal to the juicy role she's been given to play. That's why Misery is the most enjoyable, if sometimes gruesome, entertainment.
Now, this is basically a movie with two people in it, apart from the real nice supporting performances by people like Richard Farnsworth, and they're both good. And I think there was a trap here in that both of them could have easily overacted. He could have turned into some kind of a real suffering martyr, and she could have turned into some sort of avenging angel. And her sweetness and humor in the role is what kind of sells it in a way. It makes her even scarier.
Also, James Caan, who has been good but erratic in his career, plays the guy as at the top of his intelligence. He's smart. He's ticked off. You know, it's not done as the world's greatest novelist. He's a regular person. It's a very nice, even-keeled performance on his part.
So often I think Stephen King's books often seem to be based on autobiographical things that he finds in his own life, and he must have gotten a lot of letters from fans who didn't like the way some of his books turned out, and this is his way of extending that a little further.
I haven't really shown you the best part of Interview with a Vampire, and that's the production design of the French locations and the whole concept, and it's a fabulous concept of an underground vampire society, and the many quiet moments in which Lestat and Louis, the two vampires, talk about what it means to really be a vampire. This is an ambitious film by Crying Game director Neil Jordan. He's trying to encapsulate both the movie myth of vampires as well as the passion, the human passion of Anne Rice's psychological approach. And he mostly makes it all work.
Yes, he mostly does, and I agree with you about those scenes in Paris, especially that underground catacomb set.
Fabulous.
Which, you know, one of the reasons we go to the movies is to occasionally see something that really, it makes your jaw drop. And that scene is just wonderful because it implies, in a sense, this ancient society of vampires and how long this has been going on.
Sure.
I think probably like Tom Cruise more than you did. It wasn't that I had to get used to him. I saw him, the first time I saw him, I said, well, it is Tom Cruise. But on the other hand, he did a wonderful job of looking like Lestat and acting like Lestat. And I think this is an actor who is so clean-cut in his everyday image that whenever he does something like this, we're almost saying he can't do it, and then he pulls it off. I think he's an extraordinary young actor.
Oh, I think he's a terrific actor. I'm just saying, I felt I saw him pushing the part a little bit at the top. Then I got relaxed.
You know, if I had a criticism of the movie, the thing that I liked the best was the mood.
Of course.
The look and the mood and the relationships. If I had a criticism, it's that not really very much happens. It's more like an interview with a real vampire and a look at the real vampire society than it is a story.
Oh, but what I like is the fact that this is a guy, hey, you want to know what it's all about? Well, here's what it's all about. And this notion that this world exists, they made that world, that underground world, come alive.
Well, of course, the opening title at the bottom, it said The Vampire Chronicles. I wonder if that kind of is a hint.
That's more's coming. Isn't really particularly original, and for me, the best moments in Invasion of the Body Snatchers are at the beginning, when the people change into the pods. At the end, just like in that scene there, it becomes just a routine chase story. Still, all in all, it's one of the few good movies in what unfortunately has turned out to be a very dismal holiday season.
I'm with you there. The movies haven't been too good. This is a good one, but I have a question about it. It's well acted, it's well photographed. Phil Kaufman is a really good rising young director. Why did they remake Invasion of the Body Snatchers? We're both movie buffs. I think I've seen the original '56 version 2 or 3 times. Sitting there appreciating the film, I still didn't know why it was necessary.
Well, what's even more amazing, it's sort of typical of this year. We have so many sequels, part 2 of this, part 2 of that, remaking an old movie. Isn't it amazing to you as we see these films that here's this whole colony of filmmakers and they're bereft of ideas? I don't understand why it happens.
One thing we should make clear, though, is the film is worth going to see, especially if you haven't seen the other one.
Yeah, in the moment when you see all these bodies, these pods lying around, which is an absurd moment, I suppose, it does get real and you do worry about it. So it's an effective film.
One of the few, maybe.
That's Gina Davis, his girlfriend, and she and Goldblum, despite his disgusting makeup, develop a genuine love affair on screen. The movie is beautifully made without passing into what I call the gross-out category, and so what we get from The Fly is both a great adventure and a fine love story.
Well, The Fly was not on my list of the 10 best films of the year, but it was certainly in the top 20, and Goldblum, I think, deserves an Academy Award nomination. The poignancy here is interesting in a horror film. The fact that this guy who has never been able to love anyone learns to love just at the point in his life when it's not going to be possible for him to love because he's turning into a fly.
Also, I want to say something about science fiction films in general. I don't believe them. This one, I went with. Now, it has to do with makeup, it has to do with acting, it has to do with the fact that a fly could get in there. Do you know something just as clever as that? A fly could get in the machine.
Gene, I bet you're right. I bet a fly could get in there. It never occurred to me that way. I think another thing that made the movie believable was the fact that the screenplay was written and acted smart.
Right.
Jeff Goldblum is intelligent.
Yes,
they make him an intelligent character, not one of these movie scientists who speaks in cliches out of the 30s. Coming up next, and of course that's about all you're going to see of Gremlins on television. Remember with E.T. how Spielberg only let you see the little finger going around the corner of the woodshed there, and with Gremlins that's all you see. And of course there's another kind of gremlin too that has claws instead of furry little paws. That comes later in the movie. I guess it goes without saying that Gremlins started out at least as cute little beasties. After all, this movie was produced by Steven Spielberg, the man who invented E.T., but Gremlins can also be very mean, especially when they're fed after midnight, and this movie is not the same sort of heartwarming, cheerful fable that E.T. was. It has a darker sense of humor. There are some scenes in this movie where it really gets kind of gruesome, especially when that gremlin explodes inside the microwave oven. And although we accept that E.T. is a real, plausible creature, Gremlins, I think, are basically just magical little story gimmicks designed to inspire a lot of action. Gremlins is a wicked and funny movie, sort of a satire on all those grade B thrillers about monsters that attack small towns, and from that point of view, I liked it. I liked the fact that they were trying to do something more than just make another cute little animal movie.
Yes, I liked it too. Maybe I have a little sick sense of humor. Maybe. I know I do.
I do too, right.
Okay, and I like that part of it. It's not a namby-pamby little film, and parents should know that.
But I enjoyed it because it really is walking between two kinds of pictures, and I think it pulls it off. It's walking between the sweet little innocent Christmas fable, and it's also a flat-out horror film with the bad gremlins who are going to devour that town that the little boy lives in. And I thought the director, Joe Dante, really did a nice job moving between those two kinds of stories, so I bought the whole thing.
I'll tell you what, in a way, this is a haunted movie, and what it is haunting is the whole tradition of Norman Rockwell Christmas American Hollywood movies.
Right.
The first shot in the movie practically is that town that's obviously an artificial, you know, all the little lights glimmering just like at the beginning of a Disney picture, and before long, everything that can go wrong on Christmas Eve in this sweet little town is going to go wrong, and the whole place is going to be up for grabs, and that kind of satire was really interesting in this film.
It's like a Norman Rockwell painting, well, only there's blood on the turkey, you know, that kind of thing.
Now they have the ability to look at somebody else and turn into them so that nobody in town can figure out later on in the movie why the minister seems to be blowing everybody away. It's just the minister clone. Those two enforcers there may seem sort of dumb, but that's one of the charms of this movie. They come from outer space to find the cripes or the critters, and they wind up blowing up TV sets. This movie is not about some horrible, terrible menace that's going to destroy the earth. It's more like the attack of the flying squirrels, and the bounty hunters are like a couple of good old boys who want to chase them and blow them up real good. There are some good performances in the movie, especially by M. Emmett Walsh as the local sheriff, and Scott Grimes as the little kid who tries to protect his family from the critters. The movie has a couple of big laughs and a few scary moments, and although it's not a great film, I liked it enough to say thumbs up.
I like Critters too, except I had one objection to the film. I didn't like the bondage act that one of the critters did in the strip scene in the film. Yes, that's right. That's a joke from the first segment. Okay, thank you. You know, I like the film for the same reasons you did. Normally what we get are these creatures from outer space coming in, tearing up the people in planet Earth, and then fighting and see who wins. This film says, forget the people pretty much on planet Earth. Let the aliens fight it out themselves. They got these little bowling balls with teeth going, and these monsters going after them, the bounty hunters you call them. And that, for me, was kind of fun. We're sort of innocent bystanders to this whole action, which if I were a teenager, I just ate up. And I enjoyed it as a double teenager.
I like the way the movie was able to go back and forth between what is obviously supposed to be a science fiction thriller and the other part, which is kind of a down-home comedy. And there are some lines in the movie that, because they're unexpected, you know what I'm thinking of, are really funny.
Also, the violence is handled off camera, which is nice for a change. Why do we have so much blood and guts? This film is smart enough to have a little off camera. I like that, too.
It was also smart enough to have a little on camera, too. Coming up next.
Now, the test of the effectiveness of a creepy, crawly picture like Arachnophobia can be easily measured. I use I call the scratch test, which is how often do you scratch yourself during the film out of nervousness, or how often, as a practical joke, do you scratch the person you went to the movie with just to frighten them. There was a lot of scratching between my wife and myself during Arachnophobia. The low-key performances work well here. Jeff Daniels is a fine everyman as the new doc in town, and there's one chilling line of dialogue. I think about 60,000 spiders are supposed to exist in the average rural acre of land. That frightened me terribly. Good fun in this picture.
Gee, spiders are our friends. You should be happy to know there are probably good 3,000-4,000 spiders in your house, for example.
I'm very happy to hear.
You're eating up tons of insects every year that otherwise would probably be driving you and your wife into scratching yourselves even when you're not looking at the movies. I enjoyed it too, and one thing I liked about it is the fact that they only made it scary up to a point.
Right.
I mean, there are people who are utterly terrified of spiders, and I think even they will enjoy this movie because the movie doesn't go over the top into gruesome, awful, terrible horror. It's kind of playful horror. It's even I think it's a movie that younger kids will enjoy, grade school kids, because they can scream and they can be frightened without it being too real.
That's where the John Goodman character comes in. Just as when the body count starts to mount, he comes in playfully, and the movie does a nice job, and it's hard to do, of shifting tone without ever losing the tension that these spiders may attack. The other thing, as the picture started, I thought, this isn't going to work, because a spider is very small, and for it to be a credible threat to you on screen, like a shark or something, a killer, it has to be big, physically big. But they managed, through some photography, and then through these vulnerable situations, the shower, the going to the John and having the spider there, to make the spider actually threatening.
Yes, especially when they were sitting on the John. When we come back, and the car has a mind of its own. This is kind of the ultimate chase picture. Only cars, no drivers. They finally perfected it. Remake Cannonball Run. Christine turns into a horror story when the car gets jealous of that kid's girlfriend, and I guess that sort of makes Christine sound like a ridiculous movie. And to tell you the truth, it is a completely ridiculous movie. But that doesn't mean I didn't have a good time watching it. It was strange, but ridiculous as it was, in some dumb way, the bottom line was I enjoyed it, especially the scene where Christine has a duel to the death with a giant bulldozer. That scene, I think, is really going to get the teenagers going in the movie theater.
I think the reason why it works, and it worked for me too, is I think we wish this were true. It's a great fantasy that we wish were true, happening, of course, to someone else, but you wish it were true. And the other thing that I think is interesting about the movie, everyone's going to be talking about this car and how it can straighten out its own bumpers, and the special effects here are kind of good, and cars get you awful goofy, and I think you enjoy the movie at that level. What's good is this young actor, Keith Gordon. He plays this nerdy guy at the beginning with the glasses, sort of like Terry the Toad in American Graffiti, and then he has the transformation, but not just to a good guy. He sort of enjoys the power that this car gives him, and he becomes sort of mean and rotten, and that I like to see.
He sort of made a deal with the devil, like the devil and Daniel Webster. Yeah. He has said to the car, okay, you give me a great car, make me look cool behind the wheel, and I'll do whatever you tell me to do. He kind of talks into the car's radio there. You know what I identify with in this film? What? Was the feeling of absolute obsession that you have when you get your first car. I was 16 and a half years old. I got a crummy old beat-up 1954 Ford, and I was out there for at least 6 months. I couldn't think of anything else. People, you know, high school, things like that, totally irrelevant. I'm polishing those little pieces of rust and painting the wheel, you know, covering red and so forth. And it was a fantastically absorbing experience for me. And that's what I felt as I was watching the film, that people do feel this way about cars.
Americans love their cars, just absolutely love them. As one who drives a '74 Pontiac convertible, I think I'm an adolescent still with cars.